Good morning, class. Today, we are going to learn about the early Middle Ages. By 8500, Germanic invasions had all but destroyed the urban world of the Roman Empire. Trade declined, cities, bridges, and roads fell into disrepair and disuse. Law and order vanished, and education almost disappeared. Money was no longer used. For most people, life did not extend beyond the tiny villages where they were born, lived, and died. Western Europe was so backward because of this decline that the early part of this period was once called the Dark Ages. Scholars later combined the Latin terms medium, meaning middle, and avium, meaning age, to form the term medieval, recognizing that this period was an era of transition between ancient and modern times. Out of this violent medieval period or Middle Ages, a dynamic civilization arose. It combined elements of classical and Germanic cultures with Christian beliefs. The Germanic customs replaced Roman ways. By the 5th century, Germanic peoples had established kingdoms in North Africa, Italy, Spain, Gaul, and England, lands formerly belonging to Rome. The rulers of some Germanic kingdoms admired Roman civilization and hoped to share its advantages. The Roman world, however, had grown too weak to be revived. Moreover, the traditions of the Germanic peoples were very different from those of the Romans. At its height, the Roman Empire had been a world of cities with a rich culture. By the end of the empire, many towns were abandoned as people fled to country estates. The center of social, economic, and political life shifted from city to countryside. Since the Germanic invaders were rural people, they did not try to revive the old cultural centers or build new ones of their own. Germanic political life was also very different from that of the Roman Empire. The Germanic peoples were divided into tribes, and their loyalties were to their own tribe and its chieftain. There was no idea of loyalty to a state that included many different peoples. A German kingdom was viewed as the personal property of its ruler. By custom, Germanic kings divided up their lands and willed them to their sons, a practice that resulted in frequent civil wars. Another difference between Germanic peoples and Romans was law. Roman law was written law. It applied to each citizen of the empire regardless of place of birth. At the time of invasions, Germanic law consisted of the unwritten laws of each tribe. No one law applied to all the tribes. Eventually, some Germanic rulers had the tribal laws put into written form. The Germanic system of justice was also less advanced than the Roman court system. In Roman courts, judges had investigated evidence and demanded proof. Germanic judges used trial by ordeal to determine guilt. In a typical ordeal, a defendant was tied up and thrown into a river. A defendant who sank was considered innocent. Floating was interpreted as proof of guilt. After the fall of Rome, the level of learning declined in Europe. The old Roman schools disappeared. Few people except the clergy learned to read or write. The Latin of Rome was no longer the major language spoken in the former Roman provinces. Knowledge of Greek was almost lost, so that few people could read Greek works of literature, science, or philosophy. Among the Germanic tribes, there was a rich oral tradition of songs and legends, but there was no written literature. The Germanic alphabet, called runes, was used mainly for inscriptions on monuments. There were also some scholars who preserved learning. Compared with the time of the Pax Romana, the 6th to 8th centuries seemed to be a dark age. Yet learning did not completely disappear in Europe. Some scholars preserve Greco-Roman knowledge. The Ostrogoth king Theodoric, who ruled Italy from 493 to 526, admired Roman culture and encouraged scholarship at his court. Boethius, a Roman in Theodoric's service, translated some of Aristotle's writings from Greek into Latin and wrote commentaries on Greek works in music and mathematics. Cassiodorus, another Roman in Theodoric's court, collected, copied, and translated ancient manuscripts which might otherwise have been lost. He did not much of this work after retiring to a monastery, setting an example that other monks would also follow. Churchmen in other parts of Europe also helped to preserve learning. In Spain, in the early 7th century, Bishop Isidore of Seville wrote an encyclopedia covering many topics: mathematics, music, astronomy, medicine, religion, and zoology. In 731, the Venerable Bede, a scholarly English monk, completed a history of the Church in England. Written in Latin, Bede's work is generally regarded as the finest history written in the Middle Ages. The Medieval Church. The Church has a strong influence in medieval civilization. The early part of the Middle Ages, when people in Europe were struggling to recover from the destruction and chaos caused by the breakup of the Roman Empire, was also a formative time. Germanic, Christian, and Roman traditions were being woven together into a new civilization. A guiding force in this new civilization was Christianity. Christian missionaries carried on the process of conversion after the fall of Rome. As contacts between the Romans and the Germanic tribes increased during their empire's decline, many Germans had been converted to Christianity. The Church gave form and unity to the new civilization arising in Europe. Centered in Rome, the Church was the leading institution in the medieval society. Government and society were fragmented, but the Church was a bond that united Christian peoples. Nearly everyone in medieval Europe saw the Church as the guardian and interpreter of religious truth. Medieval people believed that the way to heaven was through the Church. Only by obeying the Church, they believed, could they gain salvation. The Church develops a strong organization. The Christian Church had begun as smaller communities of people who met to worship together. By the late years of the Roman Empire, the Church had developed a strong organization. The leading church officials were the bishops. The most influential bishops were those in major cities or the oldest and largest Christian communities. We have Rome, Constantinople, Jerusalem, Milan, and Antioch. Bishops supervised the priests in their districts and settled disputes over church teachings and religious practices. The Bishop of Rome, later called the Pope, came to be considered head of the Church. Popes believed they inherited from Peter, the first Bishop of Rome, the responsibility for the souls of all Christians. They felt it was their duty to lead Christians on the path marked out by God. An important early pope was Gregory I, also called Gregory the Great. Under Gregory, the Church not only watched over Christian spiritual lives, it also took over powers and duties that were usually the responsibility of the governments. For most people, the local priest was their connection with the Church and with God. The priest administered the sacraments, which were special religious ceremonies such as baptism, communion, and marriage. Monks and nuns also do the work of the Church. Some men and women chose to serve the Church in other ways. They took vows as monks or nuns, living apart from society and devoting their lives to prayer and good works. Monks live in monasteries and nuns in convent. Many followed the rules and guidelines set forth by Saint Benedict, who founded a monastery at Monte Cassino in Italy in 529. Other men and women who founded religious orders developed similar sets of rules. The monasteries of England and Ireland played a particularly important role in preserving learning. Saint Patrick had converted the Irish to Christianity in the early 4th century. In Ireland, Latin became the language of both the church and of scholars at a time when it was in danger of disappearing. Some Irish scholars could read Greek long after such knowledge had almost completely disappeared elsewhere in Western Europe. Monks and nuns, particularly in Ireland and England, also served as missionaries and spread Christianity. During the early Middle Ages, they converted many Germanic pagans to Christianity. In this way, they helped to shape a common Christian civilization for most of Europe. To the people of the Middle Ages, monks and nuns were selfless people who devoted their lives to God. They were viewed as providing the finest example of the Christian way of life. So I will end up my discussion here. I will just continue it on the next meeting. Thank you for listening.